But then the next thing was, I thought, well, wow, isn't it great to have sort of time I don't need to think about that? But really, how do I use my time, and how do I use it wisely? Am I really being intentional about how I use my time? And this is something that I've been thinking quite a long time about. One really good illustration that I have of somebody who uses their time really wisely is the founder of OM, George Verwer. And George is a guy he's now 79, still going strong. He does 300 meetings a year around, which is just amazing to see, and he's still got a great passion. But George, every minute that he has is so valuable to him and what he does. And so whenever 2 or 3 years ago he came here to Dublin and was speaking here, and I had to drive him down to Kilkenny, and he says, "Can I not catch a train? Driving is such a waste of time." He said, "I can't do emails when I'm in the car. I can't use my computer. It just doesn't work." And so even when we get down to Kilkenny, he said to me, "Oh, can I catch the train back? I'll just work my own way to the airport." And I'm going, "That's not very Irish, I should take you there." But no, he insisted that was the way, so as he could redeem his time. And he said as well that in the previous 6 months, he had sent something like 14,000 personal emails to people. Which is absolutely amazing. And that's not like copied emails to other people. It was actually individual ones. I get an email about twice a week from George. I don't know how he possibly does that, which is absolutely amazing to be a founder of an organization where hundreds of thousands of people have been a part of that organization. And I meet people everywhere. I was at a meeting on Thursday, and they said, "Oh yeah, George regularly phones me up." And I didn't even know this guy had even any connection with OM or anything else. But it's an amazing gift to have, just to be able to connect in and to be able to really follow through on people. It may only be for a very short period of time, but he even has sent me letters saying, "Oh, I'm praying for Alicia and Hannah." And I'm going, "Do you know who Alicia and Hannah are?" I was quite amazed, that he would actually spend time to acknowledge that. And but at the same time, George is very unique. I don't think any of us will be able to do that, and that's not what I'm advocating this morning, because I think we'll just all be exhausted and not be able to achieve anything. But I do think it's important that we get a right balance between how we use our time wisely, and being busy, because we can just be busy in everything that we want to do. And really, my theme this morning is sort of looking at busyness and how we use our time. And I was looking at some statistics, and the statistics, these aren't for Ireland, but these are for the UK. But I like statistics. I'm an accountant, so numbers, figures appeal to me. And one of the statistics were that the average worker in the UK works 8.7 hours per day, an average of 8.7 hours per day. And it's interesting that the average worker in Germany works an hour less every day. And it said that for holidays in Germany, in France, in Spain and Italy, all of them almost have double the amount of holidays that either Ireland or the UK have. And so really, we get into this mentality of working. And it said that the average worker in the UK works about 8 weeks of unpaid work each year. So can you imagine working November and December, the next 2 months coming up, you just don't get paid, and that's really the situation. And there was a survey that was done during the 2000s where they actually asked people how many of them, would actually say that whenever they went home at night, they just sort of collapsed on the sofa and didn't really do anything else. And a third of the people responded that was them, that was what they did. And I can vouch for that. I lived in London for 7 years, and I was working as an accountant in the centre of London. And that was my life. I would go to work, leave at 7 in the morning, get there, and I'd get home at 10 or 11 o'clock at night sometimes and just sleep back to work the next day. And that was very much my life. And sometimes we have to do that to raise finances and those needs. But really, sometimes I think we've got that balance very wrong as well. And I know that often we either say ourselves or we hear other people saying, "I wish I had more hours in a day to do everything that I need to do." 24 hours just aren't enough, but I'm sure 25, 26, whatever amount still wouldn't be enough. And we need to remember that God didn't make any mistakes. He made 24 hours in a day for a reason. And I think we need to remember that. That was part of God's creation. That was part of God's plan. And he called that good. And he certainly knew what he was doing. And so I think just generally we can be very busy in what we do. I read a little booklet, or a book actually, 2 or 3 years ago, A Busy Christian's Guide to Busyness. And it was really helpful for me in just putting some things in my life that were really helpful just to live in living the Christian life. And I think as Christians, we are equally susceptible to just being really busy. We think it's important to be working, and we make a virtue out of working hard, which we're instructed to do, and so there's nothing wrong with that in any way. And then we put a big emphasis on spending time with our families, and then we also involved in commitments with our church and in meetings and all those other responsibilities. In some ways, as Christians, we become even busier and we put even more pressure on ourselves. And when we're asked how we're doing, there's a great danger where we say, yeah, I'm doing fine, but I'm just too busy. And I know that for me, it's one of the things I sort of dread, and yet I realize I often say that. I'm just too busy at the time, or even somebody will say to me, "Oh, I didn't come into your office today. You just look too busy." I'm good at looking busy as well, I think, but that could be the other thing. But sometimes, there are a lot of things going on, and we need to be careful that we do invest the time wisely and we invest it in the right things and what we do. And I think the danger, and really what I want to speak about today, the danger is that we can become too busy for Jesus. We can be really busy doing things for him and not really spending time with him. And I just wanted to develop that a little bit today. A philosopher, Blaise Pascal, said, "Busyness sends more people to hell than unbelief." And I thought that was an interesting quote just as I was looking and studying that. And so really thinking, what is the solution to this problem? Where and how are we spending our time? What are we investing our time in? And I'm going to look at a story today. It's a pretty simple little story. You might have thought about it before. But it's going to look in Matthew chapter 10. So if you just want... Oh, sorry. And that's not the passage I'm going to look at. I turned to the wrong one. I'm looking at a few passages, but I'm looking at Luke chapter 10. It's better if I read the right passage first time around. And this is the story of Mary and Martha. And in my Bible it's entitled "At the Home of Martha and Mary." And I'm just going to read from verse 38 through to verse 42. And hopefully the verses will be up there with you. I'm reading from the NIV. And it starts, "As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, 'Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me.' 'Martha, Martha,' the Lord answered, 'you are worried and upset about many things. But only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her.'" And so this is really just a simple story, but I just wanted to make some quick observations as we look at this story. We have Jesus and his disciples on their way, and they come to this village. The village is Bethany, and Bethany is close to Jerusalem. It was only a short distance from Jerusalem. And you see here that it's actually Martha is the one who opens her home to him. She welcomes Jesus in, and I'm sure she's delighted that Jesus is there. And if we read through the Gospels, we read that Jesus regularly came to the house of Mary and Martha, and also their brother Lazarus. And it is called Martha's house. She was probably a widow, and she was probably the main housekeeper for the house. And you see here that whenever Martha invites Jesus in, she is so busy with all the preparations that need to be done. Her focus was not on Jesus. She was distracted by just all the busyness that was happening. And I think that's a picture often of how we can be very distracted. Even though Jesus may be somewhere there, we may be at something, at a meeting or something, but there can be so many other distractions, things that take us away from really focusing on what we should be doing. And it's interesting, as it goes down here, we see she asked Jesus if he cares. Do you care? You even think, asking Jesus, do you care? Surely she knows Jesus. Jesus is one of the most caring people whenever you read. He's a man of compassion. He has such a heart for those who are suffering, for those who are lost. And you notice as well, she's also the one who's asking hard questions of Jesus, even whenever he came to, and whenever Lazarus had died. she said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And she was the first one to say that as well. So she certainly wasn't afraid of saying, asking these hard questions of Jesus, or coming and sort of saying what she felt. And she speaks to Jesus. In some ways it seems almost harshly, but she is obviously upset by the situation and really weighed down by it. And then she sort of starts bringing her sister's fault before Jesus. She's quite self-righteous in some ways. She's both accusing here and also displaying sort of self-pity in where she's at. She's really feeling, hey, I've been deserted. I am working away, struggling away on my own. How tough it is for me. And yet we see Jesus, the way he replies here. He says, Martha, Martha, and here by repeating her name in Hebrew, it means that this is a very important, intense statement. He really wants her to hear what he's saying, and that you would listen, that you would understand to what he is communicating here. And then he shows the compassion as well that he had for her, that he really is concerned for her welfare, for what is best for her. And it's easy in this story, and I think we do it in many Bible stories. We look at the story and we think, they got it wrong. It's easy for us to judge Martha as we look at this, going, how could she get so wrong? Here she is, Jesus. We know how great Jesus is. Why could she not acknowledge that, spend time with him? But we are so easily fall into the same trap. We so easily do the same thing in what we do. And we sometimes start to think, it's not fair. Why does nobody look at, why does nobody help me? Why does nobody come and assist me in what I need to do? Does nobody see how much I've been doing, how hard I'm working for the church, how hard I'm working for whatever? I should get that acknowledgement. I should have people saying thanks to me for all my hard work, rather than just having to strive on my own. And some of the commentators, as you look at this passage here, they say, well, we've got two different personalities here. We've got Martha, who's very much task-orientated, and we've got Mary, who's very much sort of people-orientated. And that might be true, although I think if you look at other places in the Scripture, they both had very similar love, very similar desire for Jesus, and spent time with him. So I don't think it's so much that. I think Jesus is saying, not saying that he prefers one personality over the other. I think Jesus God made all sorts of different personalities, and they're all important. They're all vital to him in what they do. And and I don't think he's saying here that we should all just sit around and have our quiet time all day. Whatever else is happening, whatever chaos is breaking out around us, we just go, hey, no, I'm spending time with Jesus. There is a right balance in what we do. And of course, the Bible teaches as well that we need to, about the gifts of serving and hospitality. So why do you think he's addressing Martha with this issue? And why does he not even take Martha's side? Surely she had a good case here in what she was saying. And I think, I think that's maybe my natural reaction whenever if somebody came to me and said, oh, I'm so busy, I'm striving on my own. If my children came to me and said, oh, look, my sister's not helping out, I would probably go to the sister and say, hey, can you go and help your sister? She's struggling away there. And I think that would have been a very natural reaction to say, sort of, go and help your sister. But why did Jesus respond in this way? And I think, it may have been because the world values people like Martha so much. I think in our churches, Marthas would be held up in high esteem in what they do. And I think that's good. I think we need people in our churches who are prepared to do the work that even sometimes that nobody else wants to do. They'll serve behind the scenes. They'll work hard in what they're doing. And the church, of course, needs people like that. But I think for all of us, there's a little bit of a Martha in the way that we act. But I think the point I would like to make is it's really important for us to realize that busyness is not the same as faithfulness. Sometimes we can realize that we think that if we're busy, then we're being faithful to God in what we're doing. And that's a mistake that we can often make. And I think that's a mistake that Jesus wanted to highlight here in this passage. And we like to be seen to be busy, whether it's arriving early at the office. I know I worked in one company where it was almost a competition to see who could arrive the earliest in the office, to see how hard a worker you were. And it didn't really matter what you did when you got there. You just made sure you arrived there early. And it's an awful mentality, an awful place to be in as well. But, we can maybe even work through our lunch, or we can work in late, or even just constantly rushing from one thing to the next, just being busy, taking on more than we can manage. And being busy makes us feel important. And for many people, busyness helps them to feel just a sense of being faithful to God. And almost they're saying, look, God, look how much I'm doing. Look how well I'm striving for you. Look, and even maybe sometimes we're just tired. Look how tired I am because of all the work I'm doing for you. Or how, look, I'm almost burnt out because I've been serving you so hard. And I don't believe that God wants us to be like that. I know I used to hear a phrase, and it's not a very helpful phrase, but it's like, well, it's better to burn out than fade away. I'm not convinced about that at all. I've seen so many people burn out and just be totally ineffective in what they're doing. I don't know, that mightn't be quite the right phrase, but certainly, we want, of course we want our lives to make a difference. We want our lives to do something, but God doesn't want us to burn out either. There's so much teaching about rest, and as we look at Jesus' life, in so many places, he goes away, he takes that time to rest. And this for me has been pretty important for me over a period of time. I've got to the place at times where I'm almost burnt out, where I'm so stressed with all the responsibilities, all the pressures that are on me. And I just realized that I need to realize that I don't need to be so busy, that I need to prioritize in the things that I do. And this story shows us that this is not true, that busyness doesn't equal faithfulness. And And so we see here that Jesus, he confronts the fear. And really, the fear is what drives Martha's busyness. She's fearful, she's anxious here. It says she was distracted by all the preparations. And then later on, he says, you are worried and upset about many things. And, she's anxious, she's worried. I'm sure there were things that she was right to be worried about in some ways, whether it was her place, she had to get all the food ready, or she had to get the place just looking right for Jesus being there. Maybe all the other, Jesus was traveling with his other disciples. They may all have been there. There was many responsibilities, many things that had fallen on her shoulders. She wanted to make sure that her guests were comfortable. And I think in many ways we can do something similar. We can invite people, and we're so worried about how our place looks that we don't actually spend that time with them, really investing time with them. And I think that's the same for us in our Christian walk. We can so easily become busy in what we're doing. And she may have been worried here that she wouldn't get the jobs done properly. She may have been worried that people would think badly of her if her place wasn't just right. She may have thought, that Jesus would even think badly of her. But then she wants, of course, to serve Jesus to the best of her ability. And so much of our busyness is driven by our fears, whether it's not being important or not, or no one else will do it, or maybe it's a fear of financially struggling or not having enough resources, or I may lack some things in the future, or maybe it's a fear of somebody doing it wrong. I'm the only one who can do this right. Maybe trying to prove ourselves, trying to please people, and maybe trying to get God's approval is another thing that we can do as well. And I think that those around us suffer from us being too busy, from busyness. If I'm too busy at work, or my mind is just really, really active, it's generally my family, my wife, my children who suffer the most because of that. And it's very easy for us to take it out on those around us because of our busyness. And yet, how does Jesus respond to Martha here in this passage? You see here in verse 41, he encourages Martha to come and sit at his feet like Mary. And that's really why I called this sermon Sitting at Jesus' Feet, because I believe that's so important for us to do that. And we see here, firstly, that Jesus' approval is a gift. It's not something that needs to be earned. And secondly, we see that, Jesus already has all that we're striving for. Everything that we're striving for is already found in him. And, and he is able to provide all our needs. If you think about this, whether Martha was worried about the food or whatever else, here's Jesus who is able to provide for 5,000 men with the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And is really realizing that, hey, God is all sufficient. He is able to provide for us. He is able to meet whatever need. And that is actually very releasing for us as well, whenever we realize that God is the one who can provide these things. And I wanted to look at just a couple of passages. I'm going to look at Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6. Proverbs 3 and verse 5. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. I guess you almost would have known that verse before we even turned to it. It's one of those verses that we read regularly. And really, if you look at this, what is our responsibility? Is to acknowledge him, to obey him. And his responsibility is to make our path straight, to make our paths obvious, or to work things out. And so that's also really reassuring whenever we can just know that we need to lean fully on him. That takes the pressure off us in what we're doing, and that he will provide for us. And I wanted to read also Psalm 127, just a couple of verses. And Psalm 127, verses 1 and 2. And this is a verse that has been particularly applicable for us as OM. Whenever we bought the house out at Lackenhouse, the previous owners had actually written this verse on the walls of the house. And, so it's something that we really took on board as well. And says here, unless the Lord builds the house, its laborers labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. And it's just putting in perspective what's important, unless the Lord builds the house. And in all of our lives, and I think this is something we know, but it's so easy to sort of default back to relying on things ourselves, doing things ourselves, not really relying fully on God to provide the answers in these situations. We don't need to strive. We don't need to try to earn God's approval in some way. Rather, that he has already done everything and we can just rely fully on him. And so the question for us is not so much what needs to be done. The question is, what does God want me to do? There's so much need around us, and this is one of the things that I find really difficult, knowing what do you focus on, what is important, and what isn't important. That's actually why the little book that I mentioned earlier was really helpful for me to sort of start to think through, being able to discern what is of God, what does God want us to do in our lives, and what we really should be prioritizing on. And I think the first thing, and the first way to do that is coming and sitting at Jesus' feet, spending time with Jesus. Everything that we have, everything that we need is found in him. He has provided. I'm sure if Jesus had asked Mary to provide him, go and get him water or do something else, she would have gone and done that as well. But, she was doing what was right and what was most important at that time. And so we see here that Mary, in the passage, going back to Luke there, just jump back. Yeah, Luke chapter 10. We just see this picture of Mary, so busy with everything that was happening that she'd forgotten the best thing. And Jesus said there, you're worried and sad about many things, but only one thing is needed. Or this is the best thing. It says Mary has chosen what is better. Or in some other version says Mary has chosen this one thing that is important, or the thing that is most important. It wasn't that there aren't other things that are important as well, but this was the most important thing that Mary had chosen. And Mary is busy with many things, but had forgotten the best thing, the important thing. And that was starting at the feet of Jesus and spending time with him. And that's what we need to do, whether it's as a church or as individuals. We need to just spend that time with Jesus. Many times we are so focused on our service to God that we ignore him in the process. And I think that's a danger for us in our Christian walk, whether it's because of the responsibilities we have in a church or an organization or whatever else we're doing, and that we just become really busy rather than spending time and being with God and just spending time with him rather than doing things for him. And I think for me, that's a constant reminder. And so this message is for me, and if it applies to you as well, then that's wonderful. I hope it does. And we need to get to do what Jesus and God's word tells us to do. And I think there's a number of things we can learn as well. We know we need to get sufficient rest. You can see that many times in the Bible. Sometimes the most spiritual thing to do is just to take a rest and just to really get refreshed And another thing is just refusing to worry about tomorrow. It says there in the scripture, it says in Matthew chapter 6, that passage about worry, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has enough worries of its own. And sometimes that's why we're worrying about tomorrow, because of all the worries. But we need to realize that God already has that taken care of, that he's able to meet and able to provide in all of those things. And I think the picture of the Israelites in the desert, with whenever God provided manna for them, and it's just a beautiful picture of God being able to provide whenever they didn't know where that would come from. And I think the other picture I like about that is that on the Saturday, they only had enough for each day, or they only needed to pick for each day, and they didn't store it till the next day. But on the Saturday, they were able to store it, and they didn't have to collect it on the Sunday, because it would stay, and they were able to use that on the Sunday. And so, we just need to learn not to worry, because I think we worry so much about things. And Jesus instructs us in so many places not to worry. And I think our worry goes whenever we come back to the feet of Jesus and are able to leave that at his feet. And I think it's important as well, just some things like creating time within our schedule, that we actually have time to spend time with Jesus, that we have time, that we're not just booked up and busy in all that we do. I know that some of that is just learning how to manage our time wisely, but also how do we manage that time and where do we put the priorities on? I remember when I worked in London, I already mentioned sort of the mentality of the work that we did there, but I had to employ people to come and then work in the finance department. I was working there as an accountant, and I remember doing interviews, and I had to do 16 interviews in one day, so I had people scheduled for every half hour and for the whole day for 8 hours. That was probably the most exhausting day I've ever had, probably the worst planning and use of time I've ever had. At the end of the day, I couldn't remember anything about anyone who'd come in because I just hadn't planned it. And what happened was, of course, people come in and they arrived late or they arrived early, and so to actually plan that, I hadn't built in any time that was important just to spend time for myself, to think, to process. And I think so easily we can just get so busy and we don't use our time wisely and even think through what really is the best. And I think as well, really just spending time observing those Sabbaths, spending those time. God gave us the Sabbath for a reason, and he gave us the Sabbath days in our life, those rest days for a reason as well. And so I think, in the same way that Israel was commanded to take that day off, to not collect the manna on that day, God wants us to do the same, to give us space, just really to spend time with him. And so just this is an encouragement to come to Jesus, to find a rest in him, hear what he wants us to do, and then to go on and do those things. We need to come first of all and spend that time with him. Jesus told Martha that she was busy about many things and had forgotten the best thing, forgotten the really important thing. And and just thinking about Sunday is the first day of the week. Since Jesus was resurrected, we've had that as the first day of our week. And, so we have that day to rest, and it prepares us as we remember what Jesus has accomplished on the cross, enables us then to go through and do the labor for the rest of those days. And the real problem of being busy with everything else is it keeps us from the one thing, the necessary thing, the most important things. And I read a quote, and it said, "When we are crazy busy, we put our souls at risk." That was Kevin DeYoung. Just think about that. When we are crazy busy, we put our souls at risk. And I think that is a warning for us just about the busyness of life. And as Jesus said, Mary has chosen the good thing, which can never be taken away from her. And that's it can't be taken away from her. I think that's important to realize. That time that we spend with Jesus, it can't be taken away with us. That time in knowing him, that time in investing in even bringing our family to know him as well, that can't be taken away. And I think that's important for us. And so really, my message this morning is pretty simple, but just wanted us to think through, are we really spending that time sitting at Jesus' feet? Are we pursuing the best thing? This has been something I've had to learn recently more and more, just to spend that time away, spending that time with God, really prioritizing what I do. And I think the picture that here of Mary just sitting at Jesus' feet, listening attentively to his teaching, and I'm sure she was aware that there were other things around, but she had decided to prioritize on that and what was happening. And we need to spend time in his presence, being recharged, being refreshed, not doing, just being with him. And to say that, I don't want to encourage you all just to go home and relax, not do anything around the house. That's the danger here. I've got now a license to relax. And busyness in itself is not wrong. And we're warned in the Bible many times about not having idle hands. The Apostle Paul commends hard work. He says, make it your ambition, he tells the Thessalonians, to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands, just as we told you. And so, of course, we're instructed to use our hands and to use our time wisely. But the greatest problem with our busyness is that it may keep us from the feet of Jesus. But I think if we spend that time, thankfully, if we spend that time with the Lord, it can enable us and help us to even have joy in the midst of our busyness, because there will be times in our life that will be really busy. But by spending that time with God, then we can also have joy in the midst of our labor. I just wanted to finish by reading Matthew chapter 11. I almost started out there, but let's get back to Matthew 11. And in my Bible, this passage is headed Rest for the Weary. But I'm just going to read those last 3 verses in this chapter, 28 to 30. It says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I love that picture. The yoke that Jesus gives us is easy and his burden is light. We can come, we can lay everything before him. And so I just want to encourage you this week, as you go away from here, just to really think about how maybe you can make a difference if you need to make a difference. Maybe you're already doing that, and that's fantastic. Just to spend time sitting at the feet of Jesus, creating time that you can actually do that, to just really learn from him, to get to know him better, and from that, then go out and do whatever he asks you to do. So I just want, as we finish, I'm going to have just a minute of just really thinking through that. How does this apply to us? Think about that story of Mary and Martha, and just the busyness, and just that beautiful picture of sitting and waiting at Jesus' feet. And what does that mean for us in our lives and what we're doing? So let's just take a minute.